Every evening at exactly 6:30, Margaret Walsh set 2 plates on her dining table. One for herself, and one for someone who would never come home. Her neighbors whispered about it. Her daughter begged her to stop. But Margaret continued, night after night, year after year, setting that second plate with the same careful precision she'd used for 43 years. What they didn't know was why. And when they finally learned the truth, it would break every heart on Maple Street. The house at 247 Maple Street had always been the warm one. The one where golden lights spilled from the windows on winter evenings. Where the scent of pot roast and fresh bread drifted into the neighborhood every Sunday. Where children knew they could knock on the door for Band-Aid and cookies when they scraped their knees riding bikes on the cracked sidewalk out front. Margaret Walsh had made it that way. She and Thomas. For 43 years, they'd built a life in that house that felt like the embodiment of every promise 2 people could make to each other. But that was before. Before the hospital. Before the long goodbye that wasn't really goodbye at all because Thomas never got to say the words. Before Margaret became the woman who talked to empty rooms and set plates for ghosts. Now, 3 years later, the house still smelled like bread on Sundays. The lights still glowed golden through the lace curtains Thomas had hung himself, slightly crooked, laughing at his own lack of precision. But something had shifted. Something the neighbors couldn't quite name but felt in their bones every time they walked past. It was as if the house itself was waiting, holding its breath, refusing to exhale until some unfinished business was finally laid to rest. Margaret was 71 years old. Her hair had gone the color of winter clouds. Her hands, once steady enough to thread the smallest needle without glasses, now trembled slightly when she lifted her morning coffee. But every evening at 6:30, those hands moved with absolute certainty. White plate. Blue plate. Fork on the left. Knife and spoon on the right. Salt and pepper in the middle. Thomas's spot. Her spot. The same choreography they'd performed together for 4 decades. "Mom, you have to stop this." Her daughter Catherine said it every time she visited, which was twice a week now. Tuesday evenings and Saturday afternoons. Catherine lived 40 minutes away in the city, in a modern apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked nothing but other buildings. She'd offered a dozen times to have Margaret move in with her. "You could have the spare bedroom. We'd paint it any color you want. You wouldn't be alone." But Margaret wasn't alone. That was the problem. Or maybe it was the solution. She couldn't quite tell anymore. The whispering started about 6 months after Thomas died. Mrs. Henderson from next door mentioned it to Mrs. Chen at the corner store. Mrs. Chen told her book club. The book club told their husbands. Soon, everyone on Maple Street knew that Margaret Walsh was setting a second plate at dinner. For a dead man. They said it with a mixture of pity and concern. The kind of concern that feels more like gossip dressed in worried tones. "She's lost it," someone said at the neighborhood watch meeting. "Grief does strange things," someone else replied, shaking their head knowingly. "My aunt did the same thing after Uncle Ray passed. Started talking to his chair. Lasted 2 years before we had to put her in a home." That last comment reached Catherine through her husband's coworker's wife, who lived 2 streets over. It sent Catherine driving to her mother's house at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night, letting herself in with the spare key, and finding Margaret exactly where she expected to find her. At the dining table. 2 plates. One empty. One with barely touched meatloaf and green beans. "Mom." Catherine's voice cracked despite her determination to stay strong. "People are talking." Margaret looked up from her plate, her blue eyes still sharp behind her reading glasses. "Let them talk. They've got nothing better to do anyway." Mrs. Henderson hasn't had an original thought since 1987. That's not the point. The point is. Catherine pulled up Thomas's chair, then thought better of it, and grabbed a different one from against the wall. "The point is you're living in the past. Dad's gone. I know that's hard. I know you miss him. God, I miss him too. But this." She gestured at the empty plate. "This isn't healthy. You're not helping yourself heal." Margaret set down her fork with a soft clink. Outside, the streetlights were flickering on, casting long shadows through the dining room. Who said I was trying to heal? The question hung in the air like smoke. Catherine had no answer for it. Because what do you say to someone who doesn't want to get better? Who has chosen grief the way some people choose religion? But that wasn't quite right either. Because what Catherine didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that Margaret wasn't drowning in grief. She was honoring a promise. And there's a difference between being unable to let go and refusing to abandon your post. A difference as vast as the space between loving and having loved. Between is and was. It had started the day Thomas died. Not the plate setting. That came later. But the feeling that something had been left unfinished. Unsaid. Incomplete in a way that made the world feel slightly off-kilter, like a picture frame hanging crooked that your eyes keep drifting back to. Thomas had collapsed in the garden. It was a Tuesday. Mid-morning. April's sunshine warm on the daffodils he'd planted the previous fall. Margaret had been inside making sandwiches for lunch. Tuna with pickles, the way he liked. She heard the thud. Not loud. But wrong. The kind of sound that rewrites your entire life in the space of a heartbeat. By the time she reached him, his eyes were already distant. Looking at something she couldn't see. She held his hand. Called 911 with shaking fingers. Pressed her lips to his forehead and whispered all the words people whisper when they know it's the end. I love you. I love you. I love you. Like a prayer. Like if she said it enough times, it might anchor him to this world. But Thomas didn't say anything back. His mouth moved. She was certain of it. But no sound came out. And then the paramedics were there, and she was being gently pulled away, and Thomas was on a stretcher, and the ambulance doors were closing, and she was climbing into her neighbor's car because her hands were shaking too badly to drive. He died at the hospital 17 minutes later. Massive heart attack. Nothing anyone could have done. The doctor said it with the practiced sympathy of someone who delivered that news 1,000 times. Margaret nodded. Signed papers. Accepted condolences. Let Catherine make phone calls and arrangements. Moved through the next 3 days like a sleepwalker. The funeral was beautiful. Everyone said so. The church was full. Thomas had been beloved. A retired teacher. Little League coach. The man who helped anyone who asked and most who didn't. His former students came. Men and women in their 30s and 40s with children of their own, telling stories about how Mr. Walsh had believed in them when no one else did. How he'd stayed after school to help with math. How he'd driven one student to college interviews when her parents couldn't take time off work. How he'd been there. Always there. Margaret listened to it all with a strange detachment. As if they were talking about someone she'd known once, a long time ago, in another life. The woman who'd woken up next to Thomas for 43 years felt like a different person. Someone who died in that garden on that Tuesday morning and been replaced by this hollow thing that looked like Margaret Walsh but wasn't. Not really. Not anymore. The first week after the funeral passed in a blur of casseroles and sympathy cards. Catherine stayed with her. Slept in her childhood bedroom. Made tea. Answered the door. Ran interference with well-meaning neighbors who wanted to share their own stories of loss as if grief were a currency that could be traded and compared. The second week, Catherine had to go back to work. But I'll come every day after, she promised. You won't be alone. Except Margaret was alone. The house that had always hummed with two people's rhythms now echoed with silence. She wandered from room to room, looking for something she couldn't name. Thomas's reading glasses are on the nightstand. His jacket is on the hook by the door. The crossword puzzle on the kitchen counter, half finished, his handwriting in blue ink. All these pieces of a life that had stopped mid-sentence. It was Thursday of the second week when she found the note. She'd been cleaning out Thomas's desk. Not because she wanted to. Because Catherine had gently suggested it might help. You don't have to throw anything away, Mom. Just organize. You know. For your own peace of mind. Peace of mind. As if such a thing existed anymore. The note was tucked inside a book. One of Thomas's beloved mysteries. An old paperback with a cracked spine and yellowed pages. The note was written on the back of a grocery store receipt. Thomas's handwriting. Unmistakable. Margaret, don't forget. Tuesday 6:30. Anniversary dinner. I have something important to tell you. Been waiting for the right moment. I think Tuesday is it. I love you more than all the words in all the books I've ever read. T. Margaret's hands went numb. The receipt fluttered to the floor. She picked it up. Read it again. Then again. Then again, until the words blurred. Tuesday. He'd written this on Monday. The day before he died. They'd been married 43 years. Their anniversary was in June. This wasn't about that. This was something else. Something he'd been planning. Something important enough to write down. To mark on the calendar. To wait for the right moment to say. And he never got to say it. Margaret sat on the floor of Thomas's study for an hour, holding that receipt, trying to reverse engineer a conversation that never happened. What had he wanted to tell her? After 43 years, what secret remained? What words had died on his lips in that garden while she was inside making sandwiches? The not knowing became a physical thing. A weight in her chest. A stone in her throat. She couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Lay awake at night constructing possibilities. Maybe he'd been sick and hadn't wanted to worry her. Maybe he'd been planning some grand gesture. A trip. A renewed vow. Maybe it was something small. A memory he wanted to share. An inside joke she'd forgotten that he wanted to resurrect. Or maybe it was something she needed to hear. Something that would have changed everything. Or nothing. But she'd never know. That was the cruelty of it. The not knowing. The unfinished. The story that stopped mid-word. That's when she started setting the second plate. It happened without planning. She was making dinner that first Tuesday. The Tuesday that should have been their conversation. Their important moment. She cooked what she'd imagined she might have made. Pot roast. Thomas's favorite. Potatoes and carrots. Rolls from the bakery on 5th Street that he loved even though they were overpriced. And when she set the table, her hands moved automatically. 2 plates. 2 sets of silverware. She did it without thinking. Muscle memory from 4 decades of shared meals. It was only when she sat down that she realized what she'd done. The empty plate stared back at her. She should have put it away. She knew that. But she didn't. Instead, she ate her dinner slowly, and she talked. Told Thomas about her day. About Catherine's phone call. About the leak in the bathroom sink. She'd finally called someone to fix it. About the book she was reading. About nothing. About everything. And somewhere in that one-sided conversation, something eased in her chest. Not healed, but loosened. As if by maintaining the ritual of their dinners, by keeping his place at the table, she was keeping a door open. A space where his presence could still exist. Where the conversation they'd never had could still, somehow, be waiting. The next night she did it again. And the night after that. And soon it became her new normal. 6:30. 2 plates. Dinner with a ghost. Catherine noticed on her 3rd visit. "Mom, what is this?" Margaret looked at the plates as if seeing them for the first time. "What's what?" "You said 2 places." "Did I?" "Habit, I suppose." But it wasn't habit. It was a choice. It was defiance. It was Margaret Walsh saying to the universe, "You don't get to take this from me too. You took his last words. You took his important thing. You took him. But you don't get to take this. This is mine. Ours. And I'm keeping it." The weeks became months. The months became a year. 2 years. 3. The plate became infamous. A symbol. A story people told about the crazy old widow who wouldn't let go. But Margaret didn't care about their stories. She had her own story. And it was still being written. One dinner at a time. What the neighbors didn't see were the other rituals. The other ways Margaret kept Thomas alive in the spaces between seconds. How she still bought his favorite coffee even though she preferred tea. Made it every morning. Let the smell fill the kitchen. She poured a cup she never drank, just to have it there, steaming on the counter where his cup had always sat. How she still watched the evening news at 7, even though she found it depressing, because that had been Thomas's time. His ritual. And she'd sit in her chair, never his chair, never, and half watch the screen while carrying on the running commentary they'd always shared. Look at that fool, she'd mutter at some politician. You know what Thomas would say? He'd say, that man couldn't find his way out of a paper bag with a map and a flashlight. And she'd laugh. Actually laugh. Because she could hear Thomas saying it. Could see the way his eyebrows would raise. The way he'd shake his head with that particular mixture of amusement and despair he reserved for the evening news. She still planted his garden. Every spring. Exactly the way he'd planned it in the notebook he kept in the garage. Daffodils first. Then tulips. Tomatoes in the back corner. Basil and rosemary by the kitchen window. She wasn't as good at it as Thomas had been. Some things died. Some things thrived unexpectedly. But she kept at it. Because the garden was his love letter to every spring they might have had. And she still read his mysteries. One per month. In order. Going through his collection on the shelf in his study. She'd never been a mystery reader. Preferred biographies and histories. But now she read them religiously, trying to see what Thomas had seen in these stories of puzzles and solutions, crimes and justice. Trying to climb inside his mind through the books he'd loved. Sometimes she wrote in the margins. Little notes. This is where I figured it out. Or the butler did it, obviously. You would have known on page 40. She liked to think Thomas would have smiled at that. Would have appreciated her becoming the kind of reader who wrote in books, something he'd always done and she'd always pretended to disapprove of. These were her acts of devotion. Her small rebellions against finality. Each one is a way of saying, you're not gone. Not really. Not as long as I remember. Not as long as I keep your place at the table. But Catherine didn't understand. How could she? Catherine had loved her father. Grieved him. But then she'd done what you're supposed to do. She'd boxed up the grief. Stored it somewhere accessible but not intrusive. Visited it on Father's Day and his birthday and random Tuesday afternoons when a song came on the radio or she saw a man in a hardware store who moved the way Thomas had moved. Catherine had let go. Not forgotten. But released. Made peace with the past being past. Margaret couldn't do that. Wouldn't. Because the past wasn't past. The past was that unfinished sentence. That important thing Thomas never got to say. And until she knew what it was, until that door closed properly, she couldn't move forward. Didn't want to. Forward meant further from him. From the possibility that somehow, someway, she might still hear what he'd meant to tell her. People said she was in denial. That she hadn't accepted Thomas's death. But that was wrong. Margaret knew Thomas was dead. She'd held his hand as it went cold. Chosen his casket. Watched them lower it into the ground. She wasn't denying reality. She was just refusing to surrender to it completely. There's a difference. The intervention came on a rainy Tuesday in October. 3 years and 6 months after Thomas died. Catherine arrived unannounced with Dr. Sarah Morrison, a grief counselor Catherine had found online. Margaret knew what it was the moment she saw them at the door. 2 women with matching expressions of gentle concern. One of her daughters. One is a stranger with a briefcase and comfortable shoes. Mom, this is Dr. Morrison. She's a therapist who specializes in complicated grief. I asked her to come talk with you. Just talk. That's all. Margaret should have been angry. It would have been maybe a year ago. But now she just felt tired. Tired of explaining. Tired of defending. Tired of being the subject of worried conversations and meaningful looks. So she let them in. Made tea. Set out the good cookies. Played the role of gracious host even though her hands shook with something between rage and sorrow. They sat in the living room. Dr. Morrison had a kind face. Early 50s, maybe? Gray threading through dark hair. Lines around her eyes suggested she smiled often. Margaret found herself liking her despite everything. Despite the intrusion. Despite the presumption that Margaret needed fixing. "Catherine's told me about your evening ritual," Dr. Morrison said gently. "Setting 2 places at dinner. I'd like to understand what that means to you." Margaret looked at her daughter. Catherine's eyes were red-rimmed. Had she been crying? When had Catherine started crying over this? "It means," Margaret said slowly, "that my husband and I had dinner together every night for 43 years. And I'm not ready to stop just because he's not here to eat his share." "I hear that." Dr. Morrison nodded. "And I hear that you're not ready. But I wonder if you've asked yourself what ready might look like. If there's a part of you that knows this is a transitional space. That eventually you might need to adjust." Adjust. Margaret tasted the word. Found it wanting. "That's a polite way of saying give up." "No." Dr. Morrison leaned forward. "It's a way of saying that grief has seasons. And sometimes we get stuck in winter. Not because we want to. But because moving towards spring feels like betrayal. Like we're leaving someone behind." Margaret felt something crack in her chest. He had something to tell me. Something important. He wrote it down. Tuesday, 6:30. And then he died before we could have that dinner. So I'm having it. Every night. I'm having the dinner we never got to have. And maybe that makes me crazy. Maybe it makes me pathetic. But it's what I need. The room went very quiet. Catherine stared at her mother. "What? What are you talking about? What did he write down?" So Margaret told them. About the note. The receipt. The message that had become both anchor and albatross. When she finished, Catherine was crying openly. Dr. Morrison's professional composure had slipped into something more human. More raw. "Oh, Margaret," the therapist said softly. "You've been waiting for him. All this time." "I've been keeping space for him," Margaret corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Dr. Morrison's question wasn't challenging. It was genuine. Curious. "What happens at these dinners? Do you talk to him?" "Sometimes." "What do you say?" Margaret considered lying. Deflecting. But she was so tired of carrying this alone. "I tell him about my day. Ask him questions. Try to guess what he might have wanted to say. I run through possibilities. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he'd done something. Maybe he wanted to renew our vows. Maybe. Maybe it was just that he loved me and wanted to make sure I knew. And has it helped? These conversations? Yes. How? Because, Margaret said, and her voice broke for the first time, because if I stop, then that's it. The conversation is over. The door is closed. And I'll never know. I'll never hear it. Whatever he wanted to tell me will be lost forever. At least this way, there's still a chance. Still a possibility. Still a Tuesday at 6:30, where he might find a way to tell me. Catherine made a sound halfway between a sob and a gasp. She crossed the room, knelt beside her mother's chair, and took her hands. Mom. Daddy's gone. He can't tell you. He can't come back. I know. Then why? Because I'm not ready to close that door. I know it makes no sense. I know it's been years. I know he's not coming back. But that moment, that dinner, that thing he wanted to say, it's the last piece of him I have that isn't memory. It's still potential. Still future tense. And once I stop setting that plate, once I accept that I'll never know, then he's completely past tense. Completely gone. And I'm not ready. I might never be ready. Dr. Morrison didn't say anything for a long moment. She sat with Margaret's confession like it was something fragile, something that required careful handling. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not the professional smile of a therapist managing a difficult client. A real smile. Sad and understanding and deeply human. Margaret, can I tell you something? Not as a therapist. Just as a person who's lost people. Margaret nodded, still holding Catherine's hands. My father died when I was 30. Heart attack. Just like your Thomas. And the last conversation we had was an argument. Stupid thing. He wanted to lend my brother money. I thought it was a bad idea. We raised our voices. I said things I didn't mean. He said I was judgmental. I said he was enabling. And then I left. Didn't call for 3 days because I was angry and stubborn. He died on day 2. Dr. Morrison's voice remained steady, but her eyes glistened. For years I tortured myself with all the things I should have said instead. All the versions of that conversation that ended with "I love you" instead of me slamming his door. I kept my phone on my nightstand, volume all the way up, because some part of me kept waiting for him to call. To give me a chance to take it all back. Catherine looked up at the therapist, then back at her mother. Eventually, Dr. Morrison continued, I realized something. The conversation I was waiting for, the one where I got to apologize and he got to forgive me? It wasn't going to happen on the phone. It was happening inside me. Every day. Every time I thought about him. Every time I chose to be kinder to my brother, or let go of being right, or told someone I loved them even in the middle of an argument. Those were my amends. That was the conversation. Just in a different language than I expected. Margaret felt tears on her cheeks. When had she started crying? What I'm saying, Dr. Morrison said gently, is maybe Thomas is telling you. Every day. Through the garden that still grows. Through the memories that still make you laugh. Through the love that doesn't stop just because someone's heart does. Maybe the important thing he wanted to say is being said in every moment you choose to remember him. To honor him. To keep living in a way that reflects what you meant to each other. But I don't know what he wanted to say, Margaret whispered. No. You don't. And that's genuinely hard. It's a loss on top of a loss. But Margaret? Dr. Morrison leaned forward. You've been having dinner with him for 3 years. You've been talking to him. Listening for him. And in all that time, with all those conversations, has there been a moment? Even one moment? Where you felt like you heard something? Understood something? Received something? Margaret wanted to say no. Wanted to insist that it had all been one-sided. Her talking to empty air. Her imagination filling the silence with echoes. But that wasn't quite true, was it? There had been moments. Small ones. Fleeting. But real. Like the night she'd been struggling with a decision about selling Thomas's car. She'd sat at the dinner table, staring at his empty plate, and asked out loud, what should I do? And into her mind had come, clear as a bell, not words exactly, but a feeling. A sense of Thomas laughing, saying without saying, it's a car, Maggie. It's not me. Do what makes sense. Or the afternoon she'd been crying in the garden because the tomatoes had all died and she felt like she'd failed him, and a butterfly, implausible, ridiculous, too perfect to be real, had landed on her hand. Stayed there. And she'd felt, just for a second, a presence. A reassurance. A sense that it was okay. That Thomas wasn't measuring her by the health of his tomato plants. Or the countless small moments when she'd been talking to his plate, and found herself laughing at her own stories. Seeing their life together from a distance. Understanding things about their marriage, about herself, and about love itself that she'd been too close to see while he was alive. Those weren't nothing. Were they? I think, Margaret said slowly, I think maybe I've been so focused on what I didn't get to hear that I stopped listening to what I am hearing. Catherine squeezed her mother's hands. What do you mean? I mean, when I talk to him. At dinner. It's not just me talking into nothing. I'm remembering. I'm processing. I don't know. Working things out. And sometimes I surprise myself. I'll say something, or think something, and realize it's not just me. It's us. It's what we built together. He's in that. Not as a ghost. Not as a voice from beyond. But as the half of me that's him. Does that make any sense? Dr. Morrison smiled again. Perfect sense. You're describing something called continuing bonds. It's a newer understanding of grief. The old model said you had to let go and move on. But the new model recognizes that we don't stop loving people just because they die. We don't stop having relationships with them. The relationship just changes form. Becomes internal instead of external. So I'm not crazy? Margaret asked. For the plates? No. You're not crazy. You're grieving in your own way. And honestly, what you're doing, maintaining a ritual, creating space for conversation, actively engaging with your loss instead of running from it, that's actually quite healthy. My only concern is whether it's evolved. Whether you're still waiting, frozen, or whether you're processing, moving, growing even in the grief. Margaret thought about that. Was she frozen? She'd assumed she was. Everyone else seemed to think so. But was that true? She still planted the garden. That was creation, not stasis. She still tried new recipes. Still read new books. Still went to the library every Thursday and the farmer's market every Saturday morning. Still had coffee with Eleanor Patterson on Wednesday afternoons. Still watched her grandchildren when Catherine needed her to and taught them to bake cookies the way she taught Catherine decades ago. She wasn't hiding from life. She was living it. Just, with Thomas's place still set. With his absence acknowledged rather than erased. I think, Margaret said carefully, I think maybe I need the plate. Not because I'm waiting for him to come back. But because it reminds me that he was real. That we were real. That I loved someone and was loved, and that mattered. The plate is my way of saying, this space existed. This love existed. And I'm not going to pretend it didn't just to make other people comfortable. Catherine made a choked sound. Oh, Mom. Nobody wants you to pretend. We worry. I worry. I don't want you to be stuck. To be in pain. I am in pain, Margaret said simply. That's what love costs. The price of loving someone is that you hurt when they're gone. But I'd rather hurt and remember than be comfortable and forget. Does that make sense? Yes, Catherine whispered. Yes, it does. Dr. Morrison stayed for another hour. They talked about grief and memory, about the difference between honoring and haunting, and about what it means to live with loss rather than despite it. When she left, she didn't give Margaret a prescription or a treatment plan. She just squeezed her hand and said, You're doing better than you think. Trust yourself. After she was gone, Margaret and Catherine sat together in the kitchen. It was 4 o'clock. 2.5 hours until dinner. Until the ritual. Catherine watched her mother carefully, as if waiting for something. Are you going to stop? Catherine finally asked. Setting the plate? Margaret considered the question. Really considered it. Not just reflexively defending her ritual, but genuinely asking herself, What am I doing? Why am I doing it? What does it give me? What does it cost? I don't know, she said honestly. I need to think about it. But Catherine? Even if I do stop, it won't be because people think I'm crazy. It'll be because I'm ready. Because I've finished what I needed to do. Not because I was shamed into it. Catherine nodded. That's fair. That's fair. I'm sorry if I made you feel ashamed. That wasn't. I just miss you sometimes. Margaret looked at her daughter in surprise. Miss me? I'm right here. I know. But sometimes it feels like you're not. Like part of you left with Dad and never came back. And I know that's selfish. I know you're grieving. But I'm grieving too. I lost my father. And sometimes it feels like I lost my mother too. The words hit Margaret like cold water. She'd been so focused on her own loss, her own pain, and her own unfinished business with Thomas that she hadn't fully considered what Catherine was carrying. Catherine had lost her father suddenly, traumatically, and then had spent 3 years watching her mother disappear into a ritual that excluded everyone else, including her. I'm sorry, Margaret said quietly. I didn't realize. I've been selfish. No. Catherine reached across the table and took her mother's hand. You've been grieving. There's a difference. But maybe we could grieve together sometimes? Instead of separately? What would that look like? Catherine smiled, tears still wet on her cheeks. I don't know. Maybe I could have dinner with you sometime. With both plates on the table. And we could talk about Dad. Tell stories. Remember him together instead of you doing it alone. Something loosened in Margaret's chest. A tightness she hadn't known she was carrying. I'd like that. I'd really like that. Thursday? Catherine asked. I could bring the ingredients. We could make his famous spaghetti. The one with too much garlic that he always insisted was perfect. Margaret laughed. Actually laughed. It was too much garlic. It was so much garlic. Remember when he made it for my 8th grade sleepover, and all my friends went home with garlic breath, and their mothers called asking what you'd fed them? He was so proud of himself. He said he taught them to appreciate real Italian cooking. He'd never been to Italy in his life. I know. But he read one cookbook, and suddenly he was an expert. They laughed together. Easy laughter. The kind that comes from shared history and shared love. And in that moment, Margaret realized something. She'd been having dinner with Thomas every night. But she'd stopped having dinner with everyone else. She'd been so focused on maintaining one relationship that she'd neglected the others. The living relationships that still needed tending. That evening, at 6:30, Margaret set 2 plates. But for the first time in 3 years, she set them with different feelings. Not desperately holding on. Not frozen waiting. But gentle acknowledgement. Yes, you were here. Yes, I remember. Yes, this space is yours. But I'm here too. And I'm still living. She made chicken and rice. Simple. Comforting. Sat down in her usual spot. Looked at Thomas's empty chair. I talked to a therapist today, she said to the empty room. Your daughter ambushed me. Very sneaky. You'd have been proud. The silence answered, but it was a different silence than usual. Lighter somehow. She asked if you're telling me things? The therapist. Maybe the important thing you wanted to say is being said in other ways. And I think maybe she's right. I think maybe you've been saying it all along. Through the garden. Through the memories. Through the way I still hear your voice in my head telling me not to be stubborn or reminding me to water the plants or laughing at my terrible jokes. Margaret paused, fork halfway to her mouth. The important thing was probably just that you loved me. Wasn't it? That's what you were going to say. That you loved me and you were grateful for our life together, and you wanted to make sure I knew it. Well, I know it. I've always known it. Every day of 43 years I knew it. You weren't subtle, Thomas Walsh. You wore your heart on your sleeve and your love in every gesture. She ate a bite of chicken. It was good. She'd added rosemary from the garden. Thomas's rosemary. Still growing strong. Catherine wants to have dinner Thursday. Both of us. Here. At this table. She wants to make your terrible spaghetti. And I said yes. So you'll have company. We'll remember you together. Tell embarrassing stories about you that you'd hate. Margaret smiled. I don't know if I'll always set your plate. I might. I might not. But either way, you're not gone. You understand? You're in the walls of this house. In the garden. In every story. In Catherine's laugh. In the way I still make coffee. I don't drink just to smell it. In the way I argue with you in my head, you usually win. That doesn't stop. Whether or not there's a plate on the table. She finished her dinner slowly. Washed both plates. Put them away. And for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel like she was betraying anything. She was just continuing. Living. Remembering. Loving in the present tense even though the beloved was past tense. It was possible. Both things could be true. Thursday came. Catherine arrived at 5:30 with bags of groceries and a determined expression. Okay, she announced. I looked up Dad's recipe. Well, I looked up 3 different recipes and tried to reconstruct what I remember Dad doing. This might be a disaster. It'll be perfect, Margaret assured her. Your father's cooking was always a disaster. That was part of its charm. They cooked together. Not just cooked, talked. Really talked. About Thomas. About memories. About the things they missed and the things they didn't miss. Catherine told stories Margaret had never heard. About sneaking out in high school and her father catching her at 2 in the morning, not angry but disappointed, which was somehow worse. He made me hot chocolate, Catherine said, stirring the pasta sauce. At 2 in the morning. And we sat at this table, right here, and he said, "Talk to me. Not as your dad. As someone who loves you. Why are you sneaking out? What are you looking for?" Margaret smiled. That was Thomas. Always trying to understand rather than judge. And I told him I felt invisible. Like I was just Catherine Walsh, teacher's kid, boring and predictable. I wanted to be someone else. Someone exciting. What did he say? He said, "The most exciting thing you can ever be is yourself. Everyone else is already taken." Catherine laughed. I thought it was corny at the time. But you know what? He was right. Once I stopped trying to be someone else, my life got so much better. Margaret set the table. 3 plates this time. 1 for her. 1 for Catherine. And 1 for Thomas. But tonight, his plate wouldn't be empty. Tonight they'd fill it. Serve him his terrible spaghetti. And let it sit there as tribute, as memory, as acknowledgement. And then tomorrow, Margaret would pack it up as leftovers. Let it transform. Let it be useful. Let it feed someone living rather than just marking absence. The dinner was perfect. The spaghetti was, indeed, too garlicky. They laughed about it. Cried a little. Talked about Thomas's other culinary disasters. The Thanksgiving heat insisted on deep frying a turkey and nearly burned down the garage. The Christmas cookies that had somehow turned into Christmas hockey pucks. The anniversary dinner where he'd attempted creme brulee and set off every smoke alarm in the house. He was terrible in the kitchen, Catherine said fondly. Absolutely terrible, Margaret agreed. But he always tried. That was his gift. He always tried. As they cleaned up together, Catherine washing while Margaret dried, something shifted. The kitchen felt full again. Not with Thomas's physical presence, but with his love. With the family he built. With the connections that outlasted his heartbeat. Thank you, Margaret said quietly. For this. For coming. For making me see. I don't know what exactly. But something. Thank you for letting me in, Catherine replied. I missed this. Missed us. Missed being your daughter instead of just your worried caretaker. That night, after Catherine left, Margaret sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. Thomas's plate was washed and put away. The leftovers were in the refrigerator. The kitchen was clean. And Margaret felt, not healed. Healing. There was a difference. She pulled out the receipt. The note. The source of 3 years of wondering and waiting. Read it one more time. Margaret, don't forget. Tuesday 6:30. Anniversary dinner. I have something important to tell you. Been waiting for the right moment. I think Tuesday is it. I love you more than all the words in all the books I've ever read. T. And then Margaret did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She let herself imagine the worst possibility. That the important thing had been bad news. Illness. Financial trouble. Something difficult. And she realized, it wouldn't have mattered. They would have faced it together. That was what 43 years had built. Not perfect dinners and pristine gardens. But partnership. Team. Us against the problem, whatever the problem was. Or maybe it had been something wonderful. A surprise. A plan. A dream he wanted to share. Or maybe, most likely, it had been exactly what the note said. I love you. That's it. That's the important thing. I love you more than all the words in all the books I've ever read. She'd been so focused on what Thomas didn't get to say that she'd ignored what he did say. Every single day. Through gestures and glances. Through badly cooked dinners and carefully tended gardens. Through 43 years of showing up. Of choosing her. Of building a life that meant something. The important thing wasn't lost. It was never lost. It was in every memory, every story, every moment they'd shared. Margaret folded the receipt carefully, put it in her pocket, and made a decision. The next morning, Margaret woke early. The house was quiet in the way houses are when you're the only heartbeat inside them. She made her coffee. Made Thomas's coffee. But this time, after pouring it, after breathing in that familiar smell that still carried 43 years of mornings, she did something different. She poured it into a travel mug, put on her jacket, and walked to the park 3 blocks away, where she and Thomas used to walk every Saturday morning before the world woke up. The park was empty except for a few joggers and one old man feeding the ducks. Margaret sat on their bench. The one with the view of the pond. The one where Thomas had proposed in 1979, both of them 26 years old and terrified and absolutely certain. She opened the travel mug. Let the steam rise into the cool November air. "Good morning," she said quietly. Not to the air. Not to anything. To the part of her that was Thomas. That would always be Thomas. "I brought your coffee. Figured you might want it here. Where we used to sit." A duck waddled close, hopeful for food. Margaret smiled. "Sorry, friend. Didn't bring anything today. Just coffee and memories." She sat there for an hour, watching the sun lift higher, watching the park come alive with people and dogs and children heading to the playground. And she talked. Told Thomas about Catherine's visit, about the spaghetti, about the realization that had been building for 3 years and finally crystallized. "I'd been waiting for a message," she said. "Like you were going to send a sign. A bolt from heaven. A clear answer to what you wanted to tell me. But that's not how it works, is it? You told me. Every day we had together. Every morning. Every dinner. Every stupid argument about whether to watch the news or that cooking show I loved. Every time you brought me tea without asking because you knew I'd want it. Every time you touched my hand across the table. That was the message. I am here. You are here. We are here together. And that's enough." The old man feeding the ducks glanced over. Margaret didn't care. Let him think she was crazy. Maybe she was. But she was also finally, maybe, beginning to understand. "I'm not going to stop setting your plate," she told the morning air, the memory, and the presence that was and wasn't Thomas. "Not yet. But I'm going to change what it means. It's not going to be about waiting anymore. It's going to be about remembering. About honoring. About saying thank you for every dinner we had. For every moment. For the life we built." She finished the coffee. Both cups. Hers and his. Symbolic and silly and exactly what she needed. Walking home, Margaret felt different. Lighter. Not because the grief had gone. It hadn't. It never would. But because she'd finally stopped fighting it. Stopped trying to solve it or fix it or complete it. Grief wasn't a puzzle with a missing piece. It was just love with nowhere to go. And maybe the answer wasn't to stop loving. Maybe it was to find new places for that love to live. The following week, Margaret did something else she hadn't done in 3 years. She invited Eleanor Patterson over for dinner. Eleanor had been asking for months. Years, really? But Margaret had always deflected. Made excuses? The house was a mess. She wasn't feeling well. Some other time. Because letting someone else sit at that table, eat from those plates, and occupy that space that had been sacred to Margaret and Thomas felt like a violation. Like betrayal. But now Margaret called and said, "Wednesday. 6:30. Nothing fancy. Just dinner and conversation." Eleanor arrived with a bottle of wine and a warm smile. She'd known Margaret and Thomas for 30 years. Had been at their 30th anniversary party. Had brought casseroles after the funeral. Had quietly, patiently, waited for Margaret to open the door again. Margaret set 3 plates. Eleanor noticed but didn't comment. Not until they were seated, food served, and wine poured. Then she raised her glass to the empty place. To Thomas, who made the best terrible spaghetti and the worst excellent jokes. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. But good tears. Grateful tears. To Thomas, she echoed. They ate. They talked. Eleanor told stories about her own husband, dead 15 years now. About how she'd scattered his ashes in the lake where they'd had their first date, and then immediately regretted it because now she had nowhere to go to feel close to him. But then I realized, Eleanor said, he wasn't in the ashes anyway. He was in the stories. In the memories. In the way I still set my coffee pot for 2 every morning even though I'm the only one drinking it. We carry them with us. The people we love. They're not in the ground or the ashes or the photographs. They're in here. She touched her chest. And here. She touched her head. And they never leave. Margaret nodded. I'm learning that. Slowly. But I'm learning it. Good, Eleanor said simply. Because you're too young to stop living. 71 isn't old. You've got years ahead of you. And Thomas wouldn't want you to spend them frozen. How do you know what he'd want? Eleanor smiled. Because I knew Thomas. And he loved you more than anything. Which means he'd want you happy. Living. Growing. Even without him. Especially without him. After Eleanor left, Margaret cleaned up slowly. She washed 3 plates. Put away 3 sets of silverware. And she realized, this was what the second plate could become. Not a shrine. Not a haunting. But an invitation. A space for others. For community. For connection. For life. Thomas's place at the table didn't have to be empty. It could be where others sat. Where Catherine ate spaghetti. Where Eleanor drank wine and told stories. Where eventually, maybe, grandchildren would sit and ask about the grandfather they barely remembered or never knew. The plate could be a bridge instead of a wall. November turned to December. Margaret continued setting 2 plates most nights. But not all nights. Some nights she invited Catherine. Some nights, Eleanor. Once, she invited the young couple from 2 doors down who just had a baby and looked exhausted and grateful for a home-cooked meal they didn't have to prepare. She still talked to Thomas. But the conversations changed. Less desperate. Less waiting. More reporting. More sharing. Like she was writing letters to someone far away. Dear Thomas, today I met the new neighbors. They have a golden retriever who reminds me of the one you wanted but we never got because I was allergic. I'm thinking maybe it's time to reconsider. The allergies aren't as bad anymore. Or maybe I'm just caring less about being comfortable and more about having company. Dear Thomas, the garden is planning itself for spring. I found your notebook. I think I'll try the zinnias this year. You always said they were cheerful. I could use cheerful. Dear Thomas, Catherine is pregnant. You're going to be a grandfather again. She told me last week. Cried when she said it because you won't be here to meet this one. But I told her you'll be here anyway. In the stories. In the pictures. In the way we love. That counts. It has to count. Christmas came. Catherine hosted at her place in the city. Margaret went. Helped cook. Held her grandson while he told her elaborate stories about kindergarten. Laughed with her son-in-law. Felt, for the first time in 3 years, like she was part of the living world again instead of just haunting the edges of it. On New Year's Eve, Margaret did something radical. She went to Eleanor's party. Just a small gathering. 10 people from the neighborhood. Wine and cheese and party hats that nobody actually wore. The countdown happened. Everyone cheered. Kissed. Hugged. And Margaret felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Hope. Not hoping that Thomas would come back. Not hope that the pain would disappear. But hope that there were still good days ahead. Still moments worth living for. Still love to give and receive. Still purpose. Happy New Year, Margaret, Eleanor said, hugging her tight. Happy New Year, Margaret replied. And meant it. She got home at 12:30. The house was dark. Quiet. But not oppressive. Just peaceful. She turned on the lights. Put on the kettle. Made tea. Sat at the kitchen table. The 2 plates were still in the cupboard where she'd left them that morning. Ready for the next dinner. the next ritual. But looking at them now, Margaret realized something. She didn't need them anymore. No. That wasn't quite right. She didn't need them the same way anymore. The plate had been a lifeline. A way to survive the first terrible years. A way to process. To grieve. To maintain connection. It had served its purpose beautifully. But purposes change. People change. Even grief changes. Margaret thought about Catherine's question from months ago. Are you going to stop? She'd said she didn't know. But now she did. Yes. Eventually. But not tonight. Not tomorrow. When she was ready. When it felt right. When the ritual had completed whatever work it needed to do in her heart. And until then, she'd keep setting the plate. But she'd do it with a different intention. Not waiting. Not frozen. But honoring. Remembering. Acknowledging that once there were two. And now there's one. And both truths matter. January brought snow. Heavy, wet snow that turned the neighborhood into a Christmas card. Margaret woke on a Tuesday morning, a Tuesday that would have been the 4th anniversary of the dinner that never happened, and looked out at the white world. Thomas had loved snow. Had always been the first one out with the shovel, clearing the driveway with more enthusiasm than efficiency. Margaret stood at the window, remembering. Then she put on her boots. Her coat. His old scarf still smelled faintly of him. And she went outside with the shovel. It took an hour to clear the driveway. She was sweating and tired, and her back ached. But it felt good. Productive. Like she was doing something Thomas would have done. Carrying forward. That's what the grief counselor had called it. Continuing bonds. Carrying forward the values and actions of the person you lost. Mrs. Henderson came out onto her porch. Margaret. You'll hurt yourself. Let me call my son. I'm fine. Margaret called back. And she was. Tired, yes. Sore, yes. But fine. Alive. Capable. Still here. After the driveway, she did the sidewalk. Then, because she was on a roll and the physical exertion felt cleansing, she did Mrs. Henderson's walk. And the young couples with the baby. By the time she finished, half the block was watching. Margaret Walsh, Eleanor called from her window, "You're showing us all up." Margaret laughed. Waved. Went back inside. Made hot chocolate. Thomas's recipe. Too much sugar. Marshmallows melting on top. That evening, she set one plate. Just one. She stared at it for a long moment. Felt her heart clench. Then slowly, carefully, she got the second plate out. Set it across from her. Not because she was backsliding, but because today was the anniversary. The day Thomas had meant to tell her something important. And she wanted to honor that. Acknowledge it. Say goodbye to the waiting. 4 years ago today, she said to the empty chair, "You were planning to tell me something. And I've spent 4 years wondering what it was. Waiting for it. Organizing my grief around that missing piece. But I think I finally understand." She served herself pot roast. Served the second plate too. The last time. The important thing was probably just that you loved me. That we built something that mattered. That our life together was bigger than any single conversation or moment. It was 43 years of moments. 43 years of conversations. And I have all of those. I've always had them. I just forgot to look at them because I was so focused on the one I didn't have. Margaret ate slowly. Savored each bite. Tasted all the years of dinners behind this one. All the times she and Thomas had sat exactly like this, with plates and silverware and quiet conversation between people who knew each other so well that words were optional. "Thank you," she said. "For every dinner. Every morning. Every argument. Every laugh. Every ordinary Tuesday that felt boring at the time but turned out to have been everything. Thank you for loving me. For building a life with me. For being the kind of man worth grieving. That's not nothing, Thomas. That's everything." When she finished eating, she washed both plates. Dried them carefully. put hers back in the cupboard where it lived. And then, after a long moment, she put Thomas's plate in a box. Not thrown away. Not discarded. But retired. Honored. Released. She'd use it again. For guests. For Catherine. For the grandchildren. It would still be part of the household. But it wouldn't be Thomas's anymore. It would just be a plate. A beautiful blue plate. Ready for whoever needed it next. Margaret sat at the table for a long time after that. Crying. Not sad tears exactly. Complicated tears. Relief and grief and gratitude all mixed together. The kind of tears that come when you finally let yourself feel everything you've been holding back. And then, when the tears stopped, she did something she hadn't done in 4 years. She sat in Thomas's chair. Just sat. In his spot. Looking at the table from his angle. Seeing the kitchen the way he'd seen it for 43 years. And she understood, finally, why he'd loved it. The view of the garden through the window. The way the evening light came in. The angle let you see both the stove and the doorway so you could watch cooking happen and people come and go. It was the nerve center of the house. The observation post. The place where you could be part of everything. You picked well, she told the empty kitchen. Told the memory. Told herself. You always picked well. Spring came slowly, then all at once. The garden erupted exactly the way Thomas had planned it years ago. Daffodils first. Then tulips. The rosemary bush went wild. The tomatoes, miracle of miracles, actually grew. Catherine had her baby in April. A girl. They named her Margaret Rose. Rose for Thomas's mother. Margaret for Margaret. When Catherine called from the hospital to tell her, Margaret cried so hard she couldn't speak. "Mom? Are you okay?" "Yes," Margaret managed. "Yes. I'm just... Thomas should be here for this." "He is," Catherine said softly. "In her middle name. In our memories. On the way we'll tell her about him. He's here, Mom." Margaret went to the hospital that afternoon. Held her tiny granddaughter. Looked into those brand new eyes and thought, here's why we keep living. Here's what comes next. Not to replace what was lost, but to add to it. To continue the story. "Hello, Margaret Rose," she whispered. "Your grandfather would have loved you so much. But don't worry. I'll love you enough for both of us." That evening, Margaret made dinner at home. Set one plate. Ate by herself. And it was okay. Not good. Not great. But okay. Manageable. A thing she could do without breaking. After dinner, she walked to the park. To the bench. Sat and watched the sunset paint the pond in oranges and pinks. "We have a new granddaughter," she told the evening air. "She's perfect. Tiny. 7 pounds. Catherine's doing great. And I'm doing okay. Not great. But okay. And I think maybe okay is enough. Maybe okay is actually an accomplishment after 4 years of not okay." A woman jogging past gave her an odd look. Margaret didn't care. She was done caring what people thought. Done performing normalcy. If she wanted to talk to her dead husband on a park bench, she talked to her dead husband on a park bench. "I'm going to teach her to bake," Margaret continued. Margaret Rose. "Your cookies. The chocolate chip ones that you always claimed were your recipe but were actually from the back of the Toll House bag. I'll tell her they're from her grandfather. That he was generous and kind and made terrible spaghetti. That he loved her grandmother more than all the words in all the books he ever read." Margaret smiled. "That's what you were going to say, wasn't it? At that dinner. You were going to tell me you loved me. Maybe in some new way. Maybe with some grand gesture. But that was the core of it. I love you. After 43 years, after all the dailiness of marriage, after seeing each other at our worst and our best and our most ordinary, you still wanted to say it. Still thought it needed saying. And you were right. It always needs saying. Love always needs saying." The sun dipped below the horizon. The park lights flickered on. "I love you too," Margaret said. Present tense. not past. Because love doesn't stop. It changes form. But it doesn't stop. You taught me that. Just by dying and me discovering that I couldn't stop loving you even though you weren't here to receive it. The love had to go somewhere. So I put it in the garden. In the dinners. In the stories. In the plate. She stood up. Her knees creaked. Everything creaked these days. But she was here. Still standing. Still walking. Still living. I'm going to be okay, she told the memory, the presence, the love that had nowhere else to live but in her continuing heart. I think I'm already okay. And maybe eventually I'll be better than okay. Maybe I'll be happy again. Different happy. But happy. And I think you'd want that. I know you'd want that. Walking home, Margaret made a decision. Tomorrow, she'd have Catherine and baby Margaret Rose over for lunch. She'd set 3 plates. 1 for Catherine. 1 for herself. And 1 for the baby, even though the baby couldn't eat solid food yet. 3 generations. 3 lives. Continuing. And in the evening? She'd set 1 plate. Just 1. Her own. Not because Thomas was gone. But because he was everywhere. In the walls. In the garden. In the stories. In the way she moved through the house. In every choice she made. In every value she held. In every moment of love she still had to give. The plate had been necessary. Had served its purpose. Had helped her survive. But survival wasn't enough anymore. She wanted to live. That night Margaret couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, Thomas's side still empty, still untouched, and thought about all the rituals of grief. The plate. The coffee. The chair. The side of the bed. All the ways she'd been keeping Thomas physically present even though he was gone. Maybe it was time to change more than just the plate. At 2 in the morning she got up. Walked to Thomas's side of the bed. And lied down on it. The mattress was firmer on this side. Less worn. Because for 4 years, no one had slept here. The pillow still had his pillowcase. She'd washed it dozens of times, but she'd never changed it. His pillowcase. His side. His space. Margaret lay there, staring at the ceiling from a different angle. Seeing the bedroom the way Thomas had seen it. And she realized, this was another prison she'd built. Another way she'd been trying to keep him present was by keeping herself frozen. The next morning, she stripped the bed. Washed everything. Put on fresh sheets. New pillowcases. And that night she slept in the middle. Not on her side. Not on his side. In the middle. Taking up space. Claiming the whole bed. The whole life. The whole future. It felt wrong at first. Like betrayal. But she made herself do it anyway. Some things you have to practice before they feel right. The following weeks brought more small changes. She moved some of Thomas's books to make room for her own on the shelf in the study. She donated his clothes, finally, keeping only his favorite sweater and the scarf she'd worn shoveling snow. She rearranged the living room furniture, just slightly, to create better flow. She wasn't erasing him. She was making room for herself. There's a difference. Catherine noticed during her next visit. You changed things. A little, Margaret acknowledged. Does it bother you? No. Catherine looked around the living room. No, it's good. It feels lighter somehow. Less like a museum. That's what it was becoming, Margaret said. A museum to your father. Beautiful but dead. And he wouldn't have wanted that. He'd want the house to be lived in. Changed. Adapted. Like it was when he was alive. Catherine hugged her mother. I'm proud of you. For what? For living. For choosing to keep living even though it's hard. That evening, Margaret set 1 plate. Ate dinner. Washed her single dish. And felt, for the first time in 4 years, like she was doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing. Not abandoning Thomas. Not forgetting him. Not betraying their love. Just continuing. Moving forward. Carrying him with her in healthy ways instead of wearing him like chains. Summer arrived with heat and humidity that made the garden explode. Margaret spent her mornings out there, tending Thomas's plants, adding some of her own. She planted wildflowers along the fence. Thomas had always wanted the garden neat and organized. But Margaret liked a little chaos. A little wild. It felt right. Like she was finally adding her own voice to the conversation instead of just maintaining his vision. On what would have been their 47th anniversary, Margaret did something she'd been thinking about for months. She invited everyone. Catherine and her family. Eleanor. The young couple with the baby. Mrs. Henderson, who turned out to be lovely once you got past her nosiness. The neighbors from down the street who'd quietly been shoveling her walk all winter when she didn't notice. She set up tables in the backyard. Made too much food. Thomas's terrible spaghetti. Pot roast. The cookies. Everything. And she set one extra plate. Not at any specific seat. Just on the food table. Empty. Symbolic. For Thomas, the little card said. Who brought us all together. People came. Filled the yard with noise and laughter and life. Told Thomas stories. Shared memories. Some people had never met him but felt like they had by the time the evening was over. Margaret watched it all from the back porch. Her yard is full of people. Her house is open and alive. And she thought, this is what Thomas would have wanted. Not me frozen in grief. Not me setting empty plates in an empty house. But me living. Connecting. Creating community. Continuing the work we started together. Catherine found her there. Sat beside her on the porch steps. This is beautiful, Mom. It is, isn't it? Dad would love it. He would. Margaret smiled. Although he'd probably be in the middle of it all, telling terrible jokes and making sure everyone had enough to eat. He was good at that. The hosting thing. He was good at a lot of things. Margaret took her daughter's hand. I'm sorry I forgot that for a while. I got so focused on what I lost that I stopped seeing what I still had. What he gave me. The capacity to love. To connect. To create a home. That didn't die with him. It's still here. Catherine leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. I miss you. The real you. I'm glad you're coming back. Me too, Margaret said. Me too. That night, after everyone left, after the cleaning was done, Margaret sat at her kitchen table. One plate. One cup of tea. The house is quiet but not empty. Full of echoes of the day. Of laughter and conversation and life. She thought about the note. The receipt. The thing Thomas had wanted to say. And she finally, truly, completely let it go. Not because she knew what it was. She never would. But because it didn't matter anymore. The not knowing had taught her something more valuable than any answer could have. It had taught her that life is full of unfinished moments. Interrupted conversations. Things left unsaid. And you can either let that destroy you, or you can choose to believe that the love was said anyway. In 1,000 other ways. In all the moments that did happen. Thomas had told her he loved her every single day they were married. Through actions and words and presence. One unspoken conversation couldn't erase 43 years of spoken ones. Margaret took the receipt out of her pocket. She'd been carrying it every day for 4 years. Read it so many times the ink was starting to fade. And she did something that would have been impossible even a month ago. She let it go. Not literally. She kept the receipt. Put it in a box with other mementos. Thomas's watch. His wedding ring. Photos. Letters. Artifacts of a life lived and loved. But she let go of the weight of it. The unanswered question. The need to know. She released it into the universe and chose to believe that whatever Thomas had wanted to say, it was said. In every moment they'd shared. In every choice they'd made together. In the life they built. I love you more than all the words in all the books I've ever read. That was it. That was always it. Everything else was just details. September brought cooler air and the first hints of autumn. Margaret stood in her garden, deadheading the roses, when she heard a sound she hadn't heard in years. Her own humming. Nothing specific. Just a melody. The kind of absent-minded music that comes from contentment rather than conscious thought. She stopped, surprised. When had she started humming again? When had joy become something that happened without permission? The tomatoes were finally ready. Fat and red and perfect. Thomas would have been impossible about it. Would have insisted everyone on the block taste them. Would have made his terrible sauce and been so proud. Margaret picked 3 of the best ones. Put them in a basket. Walked 2 doors down to the young couple. From Thomas's garden, she said when they answered. Well, technically mine now. But still his design. His vision. Thought you might like them. The young mother, Emma, took the basket with tears in her eyes. This is so kind. We're still learning how to do everything with the baby. Groceries feel impossible some days. I remember, Margaret said. And she did. Vividly. The exhaustion of new parenthood. The way Catherine had needed everything and Margaret had had nothing left to give but gave anyway because that's what love required. It gets easier. Not easier exactly. But more manageable. You find your rhythm. Did you have help? When was your daughter born? Margaret thought back. My husband. Thomas. He was wonderful. Terrible at diapers. But wonderful at everything else. He'd walk her for hours when she wouldn't sleep. Sang to her. Made up ridiculous songs that didn't rhyme. She smiled at the memory. You have each other. That's what matters. The rest you figure out. Walking back home, Margaret realized she talked about Thomas in the past tense. Naturally. Without forcing it. Without the sharp pain that used to accompany every memory. The grief was still there. Would always be there. But it had softened. Integrated. Become part of her landscape instead of the only thing she could see. That evening, she set 1 plate. Made a simple dinner. Pasta with the fresh tomatoes. Basil from the garden. A glass of wine. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, and thought about how far she'd come. For years ago, she'd been broken. Shattered into pieces, she wasn't sure she could ever be reassembled. She'd clung to rituals like drowning to driftwood. The plate. The coffee. The unchanged house. All of it are desperate attempts to stop time. To keep Thomas present through sheer force of will. But you can't stop time. You can't keep people present who've left. All you can do is carry them forward in ways that honor both who they were and who you're becoming. The plate had been necessary. Had served its purpose. But it had also been a cage. A beautiful, heartbreaking cage that kept her frozen while the world moved on. Now she was moving too. Slowly. Carefully. But moving. That night, Margaret did something she'd been thinking about for weeks. She wrote a letter. Not to Thomas. To herself. To the Margaret who'd found that receipt 4 years ago and built her grief around an unanswered question. Dear Margaret. I know you're in pain right now. I know the not knowing feels unbearable. I know you're going to spend years wondering what Thomas wanted to tell you. What important thing died with him in that garden? And I need you to know something. You're going to survive this. Not just survive. Eventually, you're going to live again. Really live. Not the half-life you're living now, where you're just going through motions and setting empty plates and waiting for answers that will never come. The answer, by the way, was always there. In every moment you shared. In 43 years of showing up for each other. In the garden he planted for you. In the coffee he made every morning. In the way he looked at you across the dinner table like you were still the most interesting person in the world. The important thing he wanted to say was that he loved you. That's always the important thing. And he did say it. Every single day. You just couldn't hear it for a while because you were listening for one specific moment instead of all the moments that came before. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to cling too hard to things that should be released. You're going to push away people who love you because letting them in feels like betrayal. You're going to spend too long waiting for something that's never coming. But eventually, you're going to understand that waiting isn't honoring. That frozen one isn't faithful. That the best way to honor Thomas is to keep living the way he'd want you to live. With openness. With generosity. With love. You're going to set that second plate for years. And that's okay. It's going to help you survive. But one day, you're going to put it away. And that's going to be okay too. Both things can be true. The plate was necessary, and the plate needed to end. The ritual saved you, and the ritual was limiting you. You love Thomas, and you need to keep loving life. Here's what I wish someone had told you 4 years ago. Grief isn't something you get through. It's something you learn to carry. And eventually, the weight becomes familiar. You get stronger. The burden becomes part of you. Not lighter, but manageable. Integrated. A thing you carry without thinking about carrying it. Thomas would want you happy. I know that's hard to hear right now. I know happiness feels impossible and disloyal. But he loved you. Which means he wanted your joy. Your life. Your continuing. He didn't marry you so you could stop existing when he did. He married you so you could build something together that would outlast both of you. And you did. You built it. It's there in Catherine. In the grandchildren. In the neighbors who know your name. In the garden that still grows. In the house that still smells like bread on Sundays. In every person you touched with the love Thomas taught you to give. So keep going. One day at a time. One plate at a time. One small choice at a time. Choose life. Choose continuation. Choose to honor him by living fully rather than dying slowly. He'd want that. You know he would. You're going to be okay. Better than okay. You're going to be you again. Different you. Sadder you. But also stronger you. Wiser you. You who know exactly how precious every moment is because you learn the hard way that moments end. With love, future Margaret. She folded the letter carefully. Put it in an envelope. Addressed it to herself. And tucked it into Thomas's book. The mystery was where she'd found the original receipt. Full circle. Someday, maybe years from now, she'd find it again. And she'd remember. Not just the pain. But the journey. The transformation. The way grief had broken her and then, slowly, put her back together in a new shape. Not better. Not worse. Just different. October arrived with its carpet of gold and red leaves. Margaret raked them into piles, then immediately regretted it when the neighborhood children scattered them again. But watching them laugh, watching them dive into the leaves and throw handfuls at each other, she couldn't bring herself to mind. Your leaves are popular, Eleanor called from her porch. They can have them, Margaret called back. Thomas always said the best use of leaves was joy. Raking was just the setup. The truth was, Thomas had hated raking. Had complained about it every fall. But he'd done it anyway because it needed doing. That was Thomas. Doing what needed doing even when it wasn't fun. Even when it was hard. Margaret was learning to do the same. Not with leaves. With grief. With life. Doing what needed doing. Getting up each morning. Making breakfast. Tending the garden. Calling Catherine. Inviting Eleanor for coffee. Going to book club on Thursday nights. Showing up for her own life even when showing up felt hard. On Halloween, she handed out candy to trick-or-treaters. Something she and Thomas had always loved. She'd skipped it the past 3 years. Couldn't bear to answer the door. To see families. To pretend to be cheerful. But this year she bought candy. Put a carved pumpkin on the porch. Turned on the lights. And when the doorbell rang, she answered with a smile that was only partly forced. Trick or treat. A tiny witch, maybe 4 years old, held out her bucket. Oh my, Margaret said. A witch. Should I be scared? The little girl giggled. Shook her head. Well, you're very brave to come to my door. Here, have some extra candy for your bravery. The girl's mother, standing at the sidewalk, mouthed thank you. Margaret waved. Closed the door. Felt something warm in her chest. This was life. Small moments. Tiny connections. children in costumes. Mothers are grateful for kindness. Neighborhoods that came alive on special nights. This was what Thomas had loved. What they built together. What she could still be part of. By the time the last trick-or-treater left around 8:30, Margaret was exhausted. But good and exhausted. Fully exhausted. She made tea. Sat at her table. One plate. One cup. One woman who'd survived 4 years of grief and come out the other side changed but intact. Her phone buzzed. Catherine. That was Margaret Rose's first Halloween. Sending pictures. Margaret opened the message. Her granddaughter in a pumpkin costume. Fat and adorable and grinning. Catherine and her husband on either side. A family. A continuing. A future. She typed back, she's perfect. Just like her grandfather would say. 3 dots appeared. Then, he'd be so proud of you, Mom. For everything. For surviving. For living again. Margaret felt tears on her cheeks. But good tears. Grateful tears. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know. Thanksgiving came with Catherine hosting again. Margaret brought Thomas's terrible spaghetti as a joke. Everyone laughed. Everyone ate it. Everyone agreed it was still too garlicky, and still somehow perfect. They went around the table saying what they were grateful for. When it was Margaret's turn, she said, I'm grateful for memory. For the way love doesn't end just because life does. For all of you. For second chances. For learning that I'm stronger than I thought I was. Catherine squeezed her hand. Said nothing. Didn't need to. That evening, driving home alone, Margaret thought about the past 4 years. About the woman she'd been. Broken. Desperate. Clinging to rituals and routines as if they could resurrect the dead. And about the woman she was becoming. Still sad. Still missing Thomas. But also capable. Connected. Alive. She parked in her driveway. Looked at the house. Her house. Not their house. Not anymore. Just hers. And that was okay. That was right. That was the natural order of things. People left. Life continued. You carried them forward, or you died with them. Those were the only choices. Margaret chose forward. Inside, she made herself a cup of tea. Sat at the kitchen table. And for the first time in 4 years, she felt completely at peace with the empty chair across from her. It wasn't Thomas's chair anymore. It was just a chair. Ready for whoever needed it next. Ready for Catherine. For Eleanor. For baby Margaret Rose when she was old enough to sit at big girl tables. Ready for life. For continuing. For the next chapter. Margaret raised her teacup to the empty chair. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. For 43 years. For teaching me how to love. For showing me that love doesn't end. It just changes form. I'm going to be okay. You don't have to worry about me anymore. The house settled around her. Quiet. Peaceful. Home. And Margaret realized, this was the conversation. The important thing Thomas had wanted to tell her. Not in that moment. Not at that dinner. But in every moment. Every dinner. Every morning and evening and ordinary Tuesday. I love you. You are loved. You are worth loving. And that doesn't stop. Ever. That was the message. That was always the message. And she'd been hearing it all along. She just hadn't been ready to listen. 5 years after Thomas died, Margaret hosted Thanksgiving at her house. The first time in years. Catherine helped cook. Eleanor brought wine. The neighbors came. The house was full of people and noise and laughter and life. Margaret set the table. Counted heads. Made sure there were enough chairs. And she set one extra place. Not at the head of the table where Thomas used to sit. But at the corner. A small setting. A child's plate and fork. For Margaret Rose, she explained when Catherine asked. Her first Thanksgiving at Grandma's house. Catherine's eyes filled. Mom. That's perfect. They ate. They talked. They told Thomas stories that made everyone laugh and some people cry. Margaret served his terrible spaghetti alongside the turkey. Everyone took some. Everyone complained about the garlic. Everyone went back for seconds. After dinner, after the dishes were done and people started heading home, Catherine stayed behind. She and Margaret sat in the living room with fresh tea, comfortable silence between them. "Are you happy, Mom?" Catherine asked suddenly. Margaret considered the question. Really considered it. Was she happy? Not the same happy as before. Not the uncomplicated happiness of early marriage or the deep contentment of decades together. But something else. Something earned. "Yes," she said finally. "Different happy. Scarred happy. But yes. I'm happy." "Good." Catherine smiled. "Dad would want that." "He would." Margaret set down her tea. "Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone?" "Of course." "For years, I set 2 plates at dinner. Everyone thought it was because I couldn't let your father go. Because I was frozen in grief. And maybe that was part of it. But it was my way of saying he mattered. That our life together mattered. That I wasn't going to pretend he never existed just to make other people comfortable." Catherine nodded. "I understand that now. I didn't then. But I do now. The plate saved me," Margaret continued. "It gave me a reason to keep going. To keep cooking. To keep living. Even if I was living in the past, at least I was living. And eventually, that was enough. Eventually, I was ready to live in the present again." "When did you stop? Setting the extra plate?" Margaret smiled. "Honestly? I still do sometimes. When I'm feeling particularly sad. Or on special days. His birthday. Our anniversary. But most nights? 1 plate. Just mine. And that's okay. Both things can be true. I can remember him and move forward. I can love who he was and love who I'm becoming. I can honor the past and build a future. That's beautiful, Mom." "It's survival," Margaret corrected gently. "Dressed up as philosophy. But I'll take it." They sat in comfortable silence. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening. Lights coming on in windows. Families cleaning up their own Thanksgiving dinners. Life continues in 1,000 small ways. "He'd be proud of you," Catherine said. "For everything. For surviving. For living. For becoming this." "This?" Margaret gestured at herself. "A 76-year-old woman with creaky knees and too many memories?" "No." Catherine reached over and took her mother's hand. "A woman who lost everything and chose to keep going. Who built a new life out of the ruins of the old one. Who taught her daughter that grief doesn't have to destroy you. That love is worth the pain it costs when it ends. That's what he'd be proud of." Margaret felt tears on her cheeks. Good tears. Grateful tears. Healing tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "For not giving up on me. For letting me grieve my way. For understanding." "Thank you for coming back," Catherine replied. "For choosing to live. For showing me what strength really looks like." That night, alone again in her quiet house, Margaret stood in the kitchen and looked at the single plate drying in the rack. 1 plate. 1 cup. 1 woman who'd survived the unsurvivable, and come out the other side scarred but whole. She thought about all the people who were grieving right now. All the empty chairs and silent houses and broken hearts wondering how to keep going when the person who made going worthwhile was gone. If she could tell them anything, it would be this. The grief doesn't end. But it changes. Softens. Integrates. It becomes part of your landscape instead of the only thing you can see. The rituals that save you in the beginning might need to change as you heal. And that's okay. Both things can be true. The ritual was necessary, and the ritual needed to end. Love doesn't stop when someone dies. It just has nowhere to go. So you have to find new places for it. In memory. In stories. In the way you live your life going forward. In the values they taught you. In the love you give to others because they taught you how to love. You don't have to let go to move forward. You can carry them with you. Just make sure you're carrying them in ways that help you live rather than preventing you from living. And the thing they wanted to say? The words that died with them? Maybe it was just this: I love you. You are loved. Keep living. Keep going. Honor me by being fully alive. Because that's what love does. Real love. Deep love. Love that transcends death. It doesn't demand you freeze. It asks you to grow. It doesn't want you to die with them. It wants you to live for both of you. Margaret turned off the kitchen light, walked upstairs, got ready for bed, and climbed into the middle of the mattress, taking up space, claiming her life, choosing forward. Tomorrow, she'd wake up, make coffee, tend the garden, maybe call Catherine, maybe invite Eleanor over, maybe try that new recipe she'd been thinking about, maybe just sit on the porch and watch the neighborhood wake up. Small things. Ordinary things. The building blocks of a life rebuilt from ruins. And somewhere, in the space between memory and present, in the gap where grief and love intertwined, Margaret felt Thomas's presence. Not as a ghost. Not as a voice. But as a warmth. A knowing. A sense that he'd want exactly this. Her living. Her continuing. Her keeping his place at the table, not with an empty plate, but with a heart that still knew how to love. 6 months later, Margaret was in the garden when she found it. Tucked under the rosemary bush, half buried in soil. A small wooden sign. Weathered. Old. Thomas's handwriting burned into the wood. Maggie's garden. Where love grows year after year. She'd never seen it before. He must have made it. Must have planned to put it up somewhere. Maybe that's what he'd wanted to show her at that Tuesday dinner. This silly, sweet, perfect gesture. This declaration that it was their garden. Their love. Their life. Margaret held the sign and cried. Not grief tears this time. Gratitude tears. Release tears. Finally, understanding tears. He told her. In his way. In wood and words and a garden that still grew. He told her everything that needed saying. She cleaned up the sign. Found the perfect spot near the front of the garden where everyone could see it. Hammered it into the ground with steady hands. Maggie's garden. Where love grows year after year. Yes, Margaret thought. Yes, it does. And she went inside to make dinner. One plate. One woman. One life still being lived. Still growing. Year after year after year. The woman who kept setting an extra plate wasn't crazy. She was surviving the only way she knew how. And when survival became living, when ritual became prison, she had the courage to change. Not because she loved less, but because she loved enough to let love evolve. Grief isn't about letting go. It's about learning to hold on in new ways. Ways that honor the past without sacrificing the future. Ways that keep the door open to memory without closing the door to life. The plate was never really about Thomas coming back. It was about Margaret finding her way forward. And in the end, she did. One dinner at a time. Sometimes the most important thing someone wants to tell us is simply this: I love you. Keep living. Honor me by being fully, completely, and courageously alive.